Well, final preparations for today's memorial service in honor of the late Zulu Monarch are well underway. King Goodwill's Thethani passed on last week due to COVID-19 related complications. As one of the longest-serving kings in the AmaZulu royal monarchy, he's been lauded for consolidating the Zulu culture and for calming tensions at the peak of political fighting in KZN. We take you live now to KwaZulu-Natal, where we find my co-anchor Ayanda Nyathi, who is at KwaKhethomthandayo Royal Palace, where the king was interred late last night. And Ayanda, you are joined with our colleague Mbali Thethani.
That's right, Michelle, and in fact, those final preparations are underway in earnest, as one would expect. Of course, there's a great interest in getting a sense of how things will unfold today, given much of the preparations or memorial services that took place yesterday were actually taking place in privacy, so to speak. Remember, part of the king's wishes were that only men attend a small ceremony in his honor for his final send-off. But you're absolutely right. Mbali Thethani has been here for most of the week. She's showing me where to look because it does get quite busy here at the KwaKhethomthandayo Royal Palace and is with me now. So, Mbali, you know, for the most part of the advantage of being around for as long as you have is you're getting an opportunity to see the Zulu culture in its spectacular. Yesterday was certainly one of those moments.
That's right, Ayanda. Indeed, it was. Of course, we saw historical images coming out of KwaNongoma. For many people, this is the first time they'll ever see it, and it is the last as well. You'd know that the Zulu Monarch, of course, reigned over the Zulu nation for at least almost 50 years, Ayanda. So the images in which we saw yesterday in the afternoon, where we saw the Amabuto and as well as Amachichi leading that procession, leading that entourage from the mortuary where the king's remains were, it was quite a magical moment, as one would describe it.
Yeah. For those who miss it, Mbali, what is the significance of that? Amabuto bephelezela isilo, so to speak, accompanying the king and, you know, giving a show of support in the ways through which they were.
Well, Ayanda, you would know that Amabuto were the king's warriors. So wherever the king was, Ayanda, you'd always find that the Amabuto were there. So they were the ones who were protecting the king. So when his remains made their way from the mortuary, Ayanda, we saw this guard of honor. Of course, we also saw Amabuto also surrounding that cortege when it was making its way here. So it was a very significant moment. It was a very important moment. You know, even when they arrived here, they were the ones surrounding the king's remains as it made its way into that tent. It was definitely a moment for Amabuto yesterday, and this is what even came out from the royal household when we spoke to them, you know, in terms of what was planned for, the internment of the king's remains. So basically what they did yesterday was that they were not expecting more dignitaries. Yes, we did have a few of them, but they had set aside that day, Ayanda, to welcome the king back home and to, of course, have that internment where we saw at midnight where the king was laid to rest.
Absolutely. A moment that was important at the very least for the people who feel like they've been with the king for all their lives. Of course, the ceremonies continue today. A lot of what takes place from this morning will be shared with South Africans watching at home. What can we expect?
Well, of course, Ayanda, we do know that the king was, of course, laid to rest at midnight. Of course, this happened overnight, Ayanda. So we now know that the presidency has, of course, made this a special Category 1 official funeral. So we are expecting President Cyril Ramaphosa to make his way here this morning, and he will deliver that eulogy. We also know that because he has already been laid to rest, Ayanda, we also know that he will be honored with military honors. So there is, as much as it has been downgraded, but they still want to continue and give the king a fitting tribute, as the country, as the nation, as the Zulu nation. As you'd also know that a number of people, especially in this area and surrounding areas, were not able to make their way here because of COVID-19 regulations. So you would know that even the health minister has emphasized that only 100 people will be allowed to attend that memorial service. So hence why a number of broadcasters have come here, and they are continuing to broadcast this memorial service, just so that a number of people living in the community can feel that they are a part of the ceremony, the official ceremony that is being done by government. So we are expecting a number of other dignitaries, whether it is your premiers, some ministers who played a major role, especially in this send-off. Let's take a listen, Ayanda, to what Usihle Zikalala had to say when it comes to COVID regulations and COVID restrictions.
All right, let's listen to that right now.
We are concerned, and that's why we are trying our best, working with the national government to ensure that we avoid overcrowding and ensure that people are encouraged to mourn, but to mourn in respective areas and especially at their homes. We have established some mechanisms. We have worked with local municipalities to have public viewing areas which will be connected direct to the proceedings that will be happening at the Royal House. We have also established connections in each of the palaces within the 6 palaces that are in place. And we're trying to mitigate the situation.
It's going to be a difficult situation to control, Ayanda, as I'm sure you and Mbali will agree. People will want to be flocking to KwaKhethomthandayo Royal Palace this morning. What are some of the things that have been put in place to ensure this doesn't turn into a super spreader event?
Well, Michelle, part of the questions that also need to be asked is what can be done to ensure that, people who definitely have the willpower and the sheer force to arrive at the KwaKhethomthandayo Royal Palace do so in a responsible manner. I'm going to bring Mbali back in because, Mbali, you again were there yesterday when those fears around COVID-19 were raised. I mean, it was always going to be quite difficult, wasn't it, to honor a man who's played such a significant role, not only in the Zulu culture, but in South Africa generally, during a global health crisis.
Of course, it was really a difficult one to maneuver around, Ayanda. As I said a bit earlier on, that we saw Amachichi, Izolo, and we also saw Amabuto making their way here, and they came here in their large numbers. So crowd control was something of an issue. And at the same time, because we find ourselves in a pandemic, we find ourselves in COVID-19 times, it was quite difficult to even control those crowds. You'd know that for large gatherings, only around 250 people are allowed for outdoor activities. But I must say that, when we saw Amabuto making their way here, it was way more than that. There were people working at the same time. So when it comes to the issues around were COVID-19 protocols observed at that time, it was one that was quite difficult, and unfortunately it was not, especially Ayanda, when the remains of the king arrived. One thing that also came out much earlier on this week, Ayanda, is Prince Buthelezi saying that the king's funeral should not be used as an excuse to flout COVID-19 regulations. And this is something that he has continued to stress throughout the week. I mean, we even spoke to Zweli Mkhize yesterday, the health minister, and he was busy saying that as much as he knows that people want to come here and pay their respects, as much as we see these large numbers, if it was not COVID-19 times, it would even be a much larger send-off for the king. But he was here to enforce those regulations, ensuring that when that memorial service takes place today, Ayanda, that there is that social distancing, people are wearing masks, and there are sanitizers. I know that the royal household has tried its utmost best in terms of guests coming in, ensuring that everybody's wearing a mask. I know that even us as journalists, when we are spending time on the sidelines, they would even come to us with sanitizers and make sure that at least throughout the day that we continue to sanitize, because we were interacting with so many people, and these people are coming from all over the country.
Absolutely. Mbali, Thethani, thanks very much. Of course, Michelle, we'll continue getting you that perspective from the ground, so to speak, as the sun continues to rise right here in KwaNongoma. We're still stationed at the KwaKhethomthandayo Royal Palace, which is the center, if you like, of many of the ceremonies taking place today. In fact, behind me You might already see some of those final touches being placed there at this marquee. This, Michelle, is where we understand a lot of the actual ceremonial observances will be taking place. I'll also go far as to mention that, in fact, the chairs that you might be seeing in your frame now are spaced out quite significantly, and that, without a doubt, is going to affect the number of people who are able to be able to come in and watch at close range, so to speak. So I guess, that's part of what can be done, as many people, of course, pour their hearts out for the king.
Absolutely, and it's such an important question that you asked there. How does one conduct a fitting send-off for the Zulu king in the midst of a global health crisis? Important questions there to be asked ahead of the memorial service for the late King Goodwill's Zwelithini. Of course, we've got the story covered for you from all angles. That's my co-anchor Ayanda Nyathi and Mbali Thethani, who are live to us there from the KwaKhethomthandayo Royal Palace. We'll take you back there in just a moment as we continue to track the story. Stay with us.